it may take a while. I just want to make sure that we have some chance to get other updates.
Sure.
Cool.
So last week, we had a discussion on the get random process that will be used to select validators. And well, the current proposal is to use a commit reveal like scheme where on each block you reveal a random number that you have committed in a previous block, and you also put up a hash that will be the pre-image of the random that you reveal in the next block that you produce. And at the end of each epoch, the validator that produces that ending epoch block will take all the randoms from each validator in that epoch, or that has produced a block in that epoch, and hash them together. And that will be the seed for the value that will be used to figure out which validators to rotate out. So one thing is we might be able to just use if we have a set of epochs already decided up front, then or if we know which blocks are part of which epoch, the public keys that are the validators are already kind of like a commitment for they're like a commitment. And so you can, if you know, we can have each validator sign over the current epoch value with their public key, or well, with their private key technically, and that value can be used as a random value that the validator at the end of the epoch, or the validator that produces the last block of the epoch, would gather all previous signatures and hash them together to see the value that will be used to rotate validators in the next epoch. And I think that is similar to what the Ethereum is planning to try with the RANDAO. I know Mike Stay has another proposal that we're planning to discuss this further at 9:30 today.
I know that Mike is somewhat concerned about the uh, cabal forming, like the shard being taken over. But I haven't understood his concerns yet. Do you know what his concerns are, Kent?
Sorry, I cannot seem to hear you.
Oh, wow. Man, this mic is so finicky. All right, here, let me try this. Hold on. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Mike had some concerns about the shard being taken over. You know, the cabal forming and taking over the shard, which seems somewhat challenging if you have random rotation. Do you know what his concerns are?
Not quite. I know there is a attack in which if you're the last validator to produce a block, um, like, and revealing your random value, or basically by when you reveal your random number and you're the last person, you know what the outcome will be. And so you can choose to not reveal or produce the block that you were about to produce. Maybe produce a different one, or well, just I guess not at all. And basically you you have like double the amount of input. But and I guess, if you have enough of a cartel of people who do this, or enough validators that are colluding to do this, then you can control which validators are rotated out.
Sorry, it takes forever to get to the unmute button now. Yeah, I have to go through 3 screens if it goes into sleep mode. But anyway, yeah. All right. Well, yeah, it's definitely worth a conversation. That's for sure. Um, uh, cool. So we'll talk about it a little bit later today.
Nope.
Awesome. Okay. Let me see. Probably my mic got shifted and it's hard for people to hear me. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Well, I've got some slides to share with folks. I'm going to get the link. So hang on one second while I get the link into the chat. And here we go, Google Drive. Okay, I've got the link. And go to Zoom, chat. Okay, did everyone get the link?
Yes, we have the link.
Okay, great. So feel free to follow along. Okay, so you've heard me introduce this before, but for people who are just tuning in, um, people who are intermittent followers, the idea is that you can define a square root of a process. And this is just fun, it's just good abstract mathematics. It's like if you don't have any sense of the interpretation of the process calculi, you can kind of go um, what the what the you can say, well, is there a process such that for any given p, can I define a square root of p such that square root of p par square root of p is is bisimilar to p. Um, so that's hang on one second. I have to take care of something. 1 second. Oh no. Sorry, I got out of the house. Normally I can walk and talk, but the puppy doesn't have her collar on, and so she's completely off leash. No, 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 no. All right, this way, this way. Let's go. Let's go. Come on, let's go. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can hear me. All right. So that's the definition of square root. And it turns out the question is whether or not you can you can uh, you can calculate it. That's sort of what I'd like to talk about. But before I do that, I just want to mention that if you do start to have an interpretation of this mathematics, which is very common, um, so processes are, communicating processes which actually compute by interaction. And when you take the square root, what you're really doing is you're beginning to define a notion of fault tolerance, because now you have these two copies of something that when running give you your process. And fault tolerance is just around the corner. If you had n copies and you only needed m of them in order to get your process, then it would start to be fault tolerant. That would be your notion of fault tolerance. And we're kind of slowly building our way up to fault tolerance. But here we just want to define this idea of being able to have some number of copies that, when put in par with each other, give you back the process. And this is one of the things that Casper is achieving. Now there are other things that Casper is achieving, but this is one of them, right? You have n nodes running, and the n nodes running all together give you the execution of a single smart contract, per deployment. So that's a feature of Casper. And the question is, can we define that mathematically? Right? Can we get that to happen mathematically? I'll just give so the nth root gives you n copies, and the square root is just 2 copies. Now I'll just go through the math for the square root, but it turns out that it's an easy generalization to get the nth root. And I strongly encourage people to try this at home. This is definitely something you want to try at home. So let me just stop there and make sure that everything I said so far makes sense. Are people tracking?
Yeah, sounds good on this end.
Okay, cool. All right. So turning our attention to square root, we could attempt to calculate this using structural recursion, which is fairly standard, right? And most of the rules sort of fall out and make sense, right? The square root of 0 is just going to be 0, right? Because if you put par 0 in par with 0, you get 0, right? So that's natural. And if we assume that the recursive p um, has the property that we want, that square root of the inner p with itself is bisimilar to p, then if you take a four comprehension that has the p as its continuation, then you can kind of distribute the square roots. And remember, because names are just coded processes, we can co-recursively calculate a square root of a name along with the square root of a process. So input and output are more or less the same as you just distribute the square roots through, as is the deref. And notice there's one subtlety here, that we actually take the square root of the bound name. And the reason is because we're distributing over the free names. We're calculating the square root of the free names. And so they would escape their binding if they were bound. But as long as you also square root the bound name, they remain bound. So in the for comprehension, you have for square root of y from square root of x and not for y. And that's because of this phenomena that I just mentioned. So that's a little bit of a subtlety, a little bit unexpected, but it does the trick. So that's that. And now let's take a look at par, which is the beast. That's the thing that where the work happens. Now, if it turns out that in the expression p par q, p and q are isolated from each other, they don't communicate, then you can again just distribute it through. There's nothing magic going on. You just, the square root of p par q is the square root of p part the square root of q. But if they do communicate, there's a problem, right? So if you attempt to just distribute, well, look at what happens when you take the result and put it in par with itself. So I've illustrated the problem. So on the counting the title page as a slide, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the 7th slide, you can see that you can get the possibility that you get two different substitutions, because you get two different choices for the winner of the race. Does everyone see that slide where I've circled and put an arrow
Yes, just
where they're being? Yeah, cool. All right, so the issue is the two different copies and the two different square roots results can get different choices about the winner of the race. Now, this is what Casper is doing at its heart. This is one of the things that Casper is doing for Rowline. Casper is deciding that all the copies get the winner of the race. Same winner of the race. And here, what we have is, if we just distribute through, it doesn't work. And sorry, my puppy just slid down the hill. She looks really funny. Okay, so we have to do something else. And if you look on the next slide, what we do is we add a synchronization constraint, C. And there's an algebraic law that C par C must work to select the same winner of the race. Now, I'd love to tease you a little bit and defer the answer, but I've not been able to present this result for so many times that I won't do it anymore. So there's the definition of C right below. So what you do is you grab, you C grabs two of the copies, and you make sure you do an in left and an in right. So the one option is passed into the in left namespace, and the other option is passed into the in right namespace. um, and so even if you have C par C, both of the left branch choices will go into left, into the in left to the square root of x, and both of the second choices, the right choices, will end up in the in right of the square root of x. So, and the trick is that we're using a join to affect this. That's where the magic is happening. And if you if you know how to write down the definition of how to compile join away, you see that there's a choice inside join. So we're effectively implementing a kind of choice using join. So join has the power of choice inside it. So one copy of C will grab one copy of Q1 and one copy of Q2, and the other will grab the other copy of Q1 and the other copy of Q2. And then we output on a channel called out, which I've calculated below from names available to us, where I say out is equal to the, take the name of the dref of the square root of x in lefted in par with the dref of the square root of x in righted. And in left and in right is a common construction that I assume is always available to us from the row calculus paper. So there are lots of different ways to do it. As long as it satisfies certain algebraic properties, it doesn't matter which one you pick. But it's essentially a way of bifurcating the namespace, and that's the trick, is that we're bifurcating the namespace. We're making it two isomorphic infinite copies of a namespace. So then we on the out channel we flip a coin. We flip a coin and send it on out, and then we grab two outcomes. And the reason we do that is because um, we know that both parties, both copies of C, are putting on the out channel the result of flipping a coin. And what will happen is that one of them will grab both coin flips, and it doesn't matter which one grab because they're both copies, right? So they'll both grab the two copies, and then we run what a friend of mine, Steve Bjorg, used to call the beast or freak decision. So we compare the two coin flips with a match to decide whether the pair is a beast or a freak. A freak has two heads or two tails, and a beast has a head and a tail. Right? So two heads would be 0, 0, two tails would be 1, 1. A head and a tail would be either 0, 1 or 1, 0. Right? So that's and that allows us to make a decision, right? Because the coin flip outcomes classify in this way. Then what you see is if it's a freak, then you make the Q1 choice, and you release the two results, right? Because the other copy of C is starved; it's blocked because it didn't win the choice, the join operation. Right? So one of them won the join by grabbing both copies, and the other one is starved. It's sitting there locked out from being able to be processed. So on the square root of x channel, which is being weighted on by both copies of the for comprehension, right? So you put out the Q1 and then you unlock the other one with the outcome that it was a freak. And so and then it will then run, it will grab both coin flips and it will see that it's a freak coin flip and put out, just as in this logic, it will put out the uh, out Q. This is the X, on the awaiting square root of X, it will do the Q1, and vice versa, right? Symmetrically, if it's a beast, it will do the same. So you see that this algorithm will in fact cause both copies to choose exactly the same choice. Does that make sense? Does everyone see how that works?
Yeah. Just to clarify one point. So with the freak, that was a 0 0 or a 1 1, and okay. I'm just want to make sure I was following that part correctly. Okay.
Yeah. So a freak is either two tails or two heads,
Right. Okay.
and a beast has a head and a tail.
Beast would be the 1 and a 0.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Just like a dog, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. This is a freaky dog if it has two heads, and it's a freaky dog if it has two tails. But if it has a head and a tail, then it's a normal dog. And so and that classification. Now notice that this classification is just like voting, and it's very, very similar to it's like a prefigured voting, and it's very similar to our error correcting code.
Okay.
So the introduction of this synchronization constraint, which solves our puzzle, is closely related to the error correcting codes. And in fact, this is what's necessary. Your pars have to have this synchronization constraint, which is like an error correcting code, in order to do this. And it looks even more interestingly like error correcting codes if you do the nth root case. Yeah, there's a way to clean this up so you don't have garbage sitting on the out channel after the second round, but I didn't write that down. It unnecessarily complicates the solution, but it's worth seeing how to clean that up. And there you have it. So now if you compare this to what Casper does, so this works and doesn't defy FLP, because we're assuming that there's no loss on the channel's square root of X. There's no loss. We don't care about reordering, but we do care that those things remain in those channels indefinitely and that they will eventually be picked up. Or they remain until they are picked up. So that's why this is FLP avoidant, so to speak. And the other thing that Casper does is it allows to pick up some quorum of the roots instead of having to have exactly 2 or exactly n in the case of the nth root. It picks out m of n, and does so on the basis of weight. So that would be where we move from this kind of sort of more tinker toy, or idealized thing, into something that's more realistic. But again, the math here is remarkably resilient. It's not fragile. So you can mess about with the way it works, and I think with a little luck, find a way to introduce some quorum-like calculation. Now, the one thing where the economics starts to creep in is in the incentivization, and the reason there is because we didn't. The other thing we don't cover here in this calculation is what if the C's lie? Right. So one of the C's is perfectly honest and it sees that it's a beast or it sees that it's a freak and it does the right thing. But the other C sees that it's a beast and claims that it's a freak. And then you, if the C is not trustworthy, then you would get again bifurcation of the network because one side would say the substitute q1 in for square root of y, and the other side would say substitute q2 in for the square root of y, and they would see different worlds from that point. So the economics is there to handle the case when the C's are not trustworthy. So that's the other thing that the Casper does that this little algorithm doesn't do. But this little algorithm helps us see more clearly precisely what Casper does, and helps us get into. I mean, what would be ideal is to be able to have a nice symbol pushing specification of Casper like this. Right, this is very tractable. In by the time we get to 8 slides, I've defined the whole thing, right, and I could condense this down to 3 pages of mathematics, and that's very tractable. It's easy. I mean, you could code this up in a theorem prover and easily prove that it does what it says it does. So that's a that's a very nice result, but it's so nice that it's not realistic in the way that Casper is realistic. And but the question is it a good foothold to get a more tractable proof of the correctness of Casper? One where we're using equational reasoning and by simulation um, to to um, to prove the correctness. And that, I think, that's something that I would really like to have, and because in that case we can lift such a correctness proof again with a with a pinch of luck. Most of those correctness proofs will lift to a type checking mechanism, in which case we can type, certainly you can type check here. Um, you can type check for certain structural properties. The randomness piece is harder to type check for, but everything else you could type check for, and that would give you an ability to recognize when a party is presenting um, a, synchronization constraint like C as a candidate for doing consensus. Does that make sense? Do people understand what the issues are and why they fit together?
Yeah, I'm getting a general sense of what you're doing. So each time that I hear it, I'm kind of building on what you discussed last week. So I'm getting there. Do you plan on? Will this be a future RCast presentation by chance?
Yeah, that's this week's arc.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I think when I hear it a third time, it'll help me get further along.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let me check in. Kent, does that make sense to you?
I missed out about like 20% of it because you kind of go in and out. But I guess one question is like, how is I couldn't quite understand I guess I understand how the nth roots can be combined as if they're validators um, in Casper, and
Mm-hmm.
essentially you describe how to take care of the interference. But I I guess I'm wondering like it still doesn't quite map over to how I understand how the chain progresses. I guess.
Sure. Yeah, there isn't a blockchain here, right? And that's kind of what I was saying is there's no blockchain. I don't need a blockchain in order to do the root calculation. But that's because we have other constraints that Casper and the chain are solving, right? And those things that we're looking for, we want to be able to handle a quorum. So you don't want to just have the oh, let me stop. Can you hear my audio?
Like I can, but like missing out a word kind of is pretty crucial. Like, or
Okay, well
no,
let
I
me try
understood
to
what you said there, if that makes sense, but
let me just make I'm just readjusting the microphone. It seems to be so finicky. I don't understand. It's just normal microphone, and I've tried like three different copies of the same microphone.
yep,
It's
yep,
just
that's much better right now.
okay. All right. Well, let me do that. Okay. So the so the Casper and the blockchain do more for us than the radical um, algorithm does, right? In particular, they address only needing a quorum of these synchronizers. So, so the synchronizer is really what's playing the role of Casper, and P is the smart contract that you're running. That's the way to think about it. And the different synchronizers are all making sure that we only get one copy of P executed instead of n copies of P. And but Casper does more than just this synchronizer, right? The synchronizer, uh, you have to have exactly n copies of the synchronizer. Where if you're looking at the square root, you need 2 of them. If you're looking at the nth root, you need n of them, and all of them have to execute, or you don't get the P implemented. You don't get P run. So Casper does something better. It says instead of having all n run, you only have to have m of them run, and we'll guarantee that P is run. Does that make sense?
I guess not really, but
Well, it's a quorum thing, right? That's what the stake weight is doing. Like here, the quorum is all of the validators. They all have to run exactly. Whereas in Casper, because of stake weight calculations, you only have to do you only have to do you can get a block finalized without all of the validators doing their having weighed in, so to speak.
sure, I
Okay.
understand that
Okay,
part.
so that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is that Casper deals with what happens if some of the messages get dropped, and Casper deals with what happens if um, uh, some of the validators lie. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I follow your words.
Okay, so C is not doing that, right? Like if you ran a C together with a C variant, where that variant switched its what happens, or just randomly chose what happens with Beast or Freak, right? That wouldn't work. right? Whereas Casper has slashing, and slashing deals with equivocation.
Sure.
Okay, right. So, so what this calculation shows is some of the subtleties that Casper is doing, that are more than just you know, a kind of straight up fault tolerance, right?
Okay.
Okay, so but so as long as you follow that part, then you know essentially what it's doing is it provides, you know, on the one hand motivation for Casper, but on the other hand what it says is, well, this is the fairly crisply defined list of features that you need in order to have a spec like this for Casper. So we can kind of, you know, in software development terms, we do a gap analysis, right? You know, here's a completely mathematically defined specification, and we can prove either by hand or with a theorem prover that it works. But it doesn't do everything that Casper does. And so now what we could do is we could start here and begin adding features, you know, one at a time until we got to Casper. And the hope would be that in doing so, each transformation would be correctness preserving. So every time we took this little tiny toy protocol and we added something, like we added um, a quorum, like, so you didn't have to have all n copies of C, you just had to have m of them in order to have the outcome work. Um, then the proof would remain solid, right? So we go from the one where you need all n to the one where you only need m, and as long as the proof remains solid, then you're correct by construction. And so the definition of C, whatever that might look like, has now evolved to a correct definition that is provably correct, and the proof is in some sense the implementation. So this is you know, we're following the correct by construction methodology, and we use this little tiny toy to slowly build up something that isn't a toy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the approach.
Okay. So which part was missing? That maybe that's a bad question to ask, but
Well, so one thing I'm wondering is how come if you can't do it for the square root of m, let's say, instead of the full n?
you mean m
Yeah,
copies?
m copies.
Well, I mean, if you just use my algorithm here, you'll be there'll be n minus m that could be getting the wrong substitution.
Or like, oh, maybe I don't quite understand that. But is that because?
Because you haven't nailed them all down. They all have to agree on the choice. So in order to make it work, you'd have to find a way to, once you've passed a quorum or a threshold, that it forces the others into agreement.
I guess the way, maybe I'm taking a too Casper-centric view on this, but the others don't exist is sort of how I see it. But maybe I'm still operating under some assumptions that Casper has that this
Yes, that
model.
yes, yes. So what's going on here is that I've been really um super disciplined about how we have to meet the equational constraints, so that later when I go and do an equational proof, I don't have a lot of messy details that I have to finagle with. um, so in particular, I'm insisting that C par C has to behave in a particular way. Well, now what's going on in the other case is that you would have um, n copies of C, and only m of them have to behave in a certain way, and then the whole ensemble um, would do its work correctly. Now, one way to get a handle on this is to know you could look at it from above instead of from below. So instead of saying that m is smaller than n, you could say that n is the quorum necessary to get certainty. And so if you had an m that was greater than n, then the extra copies wouldn't do anything. But the quorum, the smallest quorum that guarantees the correct behavior is um, is n. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. And if you want to do less than n, then you have to do some fancy footwork. But the one thing that this does share with Casper is that it's leaderless. There's nothing. There's no election of a leader. There's no. Um, uh, I mean, you could say that grabbing the join, uh, grabbing grabbing both coin flips is the election of a leader. But that's a you really they're completely symmetric. You don't really care. All you're doing is you're forcing the choice by the voting. So it doesn't really matter which one of them grabs it. They're all exactly the same copy. But it is leaderless in that sense.
yeah, I think
So that's what. Go ahead.
I think Casper works the same way, in which if you if that is considered picking a leader, then the estimator is kind of picking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the beast or freak decision is the estimator. It's just that we have you know, we don't have any intermediate states. Like there's no place where you could. There's no case in that logic where you don't have enough information to decide which of the outcomes it is. Whereas in the estimator case, you can have a place where you don't have enough information yet. So you can be in states that are not safe. Whereas here, as soon as you passed the join guard, you've already crossed the safety threshold. There's no way that anyone can get to a non-safe state. Once both coin flips have been grabbed, you've guaranteed safety. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool, cool. Well, I mean, I really appreciate you guys letting me babble on about this. To me, um, this is just this is how I like to do software development. Is in this nice, crisp, clean, correct by construction, one step at a time kind of way. I mean, this is just a toy to show how, to illustrate the methodology. Um, but this is the way I like to get things done, and it goes all the way back to the heavily influential paper, Computational Interpretations of Linear Logic, in which um, Samson Abramsky does something similar for a linear abstract machine, classical linear logic abstract machine. He does something similar in the sense that it's the logic completely defines the execution. So yeah.
Well, good. Even though I'm not quite there like Kent is, I certainly enjoyed listening to it. So, and I'll probably,
good.
yeah, I'm looking forward to the Rcast. And it's for me, everything it builds. So, I'm hearing a word there or a term there, getting a better understanding. So it helps with my overall understanding of the consensus protocol. So, yeah, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I appreciate your time and attention. And yeah, I'm the same way. I like being thrown in the middle of something. Okay, I mean that's sort of how it happens with life, right? Where we don't come in at the beginning of the universe, and it's quite unlikely also that we come in at the end of the universe. And we're thrown into the middle of the universe, and we have to figure out figure out the plot, right? You come into the middle of the story, and you have to figure out the plot.
Exactly. Right. And it's it takes time, but the dots start to come together. So this is all good.
Yeah. Cool. And the other thing that I put a copy of this up on social media, and someone was commenting, "Oh, I'm going to have to trust you on that one." The nice thing is you don't have to trust me at all. You can go. I've laid out enough that you can go do the calculations yourself, or it's like, yeah, if you invest enough time, you can go and do the calculations yourself, and you don't have to trust me at all. Either what I'm saying is true or it's not true, and that is outside of um, my feelings about consensus protocols or your feelings about consensus protocols. These things are objectively verifiable, and that I think is a really it separates this culture from other kinds of cultures. And this was sort of a point I was making in the science and governance. There is a governance process and operation here, which is that we modify, the collective modifies the behavior of individuals based upon the amount of attention that they give to various individuals, based upon whether or not their claims end up being verified. So it's a really it's a different culture, and it has a different and it shares something with democracy, in the sense that it's open to all, right? Everyone can have a voice, and everyone can engage. There's no guards or gates, right? There's no locked castle, but uh, but that but it isn't the same as democracy, in the sense that it's not opinion, right? Voting and markets are ways of elucidating opinion, but not fact. And so that's one of the things I like about the engineering culture and the science culture, is that there's this other governance model that's at play.
Right. Yeah, that speaks to a whole nother fascinating element of what we're doing here.
Yeah, agreed. All right, folks, enjoyed the time. Got to jump over to stand up, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.